Imagine hearing that your legendary father, one of the most feared warriors in history, was brutally executed by an enemy king. Now imagine what happens when his sons decide revenge isn't enough, they want an entire kingdom to pay. That's exactly what happened in the year 865. A massive Viking force suddenly landed on the shores of England. Not a small raiding party. Not a quick attack for treasure. This was something far bigger. It was called the Great Heathen Army. And its mission was simple: avenge the death of Ragnar Lothbrok. But here's the twist: most people don't realize this wasn't just a revenge mission. What started as vengeance would completely reshape the future of England. By the end of this story, kingdoms would fall, kings would die, and the Vikings would control half of England. The story begins with Ragnar Lothbrok, the legendary Viking warrior whose name spread across Scandinavia and England. According to the Old Norse sagas, Ragnar spent years raiding foreign lands, building a reputation that made kings fear the sight of Viking ships on the horizon. But every legend eventually faces a moment of bad luck. Ragnar launched another attack on England, this time targeting the kingdom of Northumbria. Instead of victory, he was captured by King Lla. Rather than granting him the honorable death of a warrior, Lla ordered something far more brutal. Ragnar was thrown into a pit filled with venomous snakes. As the story goes, Ragnar laughed even as the snakes bit him. And before he died, he said something that would echo across history. He said, "How the little pigs would grunt if they knew how the old boar suffers." The little pigs were his sons. And when they heard what had happened to their father, the response was immediate and terrifying. This time the Vikings were not coming to raid. They were coming for revenge. In the year 865 AD, something unprecedented happened. Instead of a few ships appearing on the coast like usual Viking raids, a massive force arrived. Historians later called it the Great Heathen Army. This army was reportedly led by Ragnar's sons, including Ivar the Boneless, Bjorn Ironside, Halfdan Ragnarsson, and Ubba. What made this army different from earlier Viking attacks was its size and its strategy. Normally Vikings would attack quickly, grab treasure, and sail home. But this army came with a different plan. They intended to stay. Thousands of Viking warriors landed in England with the goal of destroying the kingdom responsible for Ragnar's death. Their first destination was obvious: Northumbria, the land ruled by King Lla. But here's where the situation in England made things even easier for the Vikings. England at the time wasn't one unified country. It was divided into several separate kingdoms like Northumbria, Mercia, East Anglia, and Wessex. And these kingdoms were constantly fighting each other. So when the Vikings arrived, England was already weak and divided. Instead of a united defense, every kingdom was focused on its own survival. The Great Heathen Army took advantage of that immediately. In 866 AD, the Vikings captured the city of York, one of the most important cities in Northumbria. At the time, Northumbria was already unstable because two rival kings were fighting for control. When they realized the Vikings had taken York, the rival kings attempted to unite their forces and retake the city. It didn't work. The Viking army defeated them in battle, and during the chaos, King Lla was captured. This was the moment Ragnar's sons had been waiting for. According to Viking legends, they executed Lla in an extremely brutal way known as the Blood Eagle. In this method, the victim's back was cut open and the ribs pulled outward like wings. Some historians debate whether the Blood Eagle actually happened or if it was exaggerated in later stories. But whether it was myth or reality, the message was clear. The man who killed Ragnar Lothbrok was dead. Revenge had been achieved. But something unexpected happened next. Instead of returning home to Scandinavia, the Vikings realized how vulnerable England really was. The land was rich, the kingdoms were divided, and there was very little coordination between them. So the Great Heathen Army changed its mission. Revenge turned into conquest. After securing Northumbria, the Vikings moved south toward Mercia, forcing its rulers into submission. Then they pushed further into East Anglia. There they faced King Edmund. According to historical records, Edmund refused to submit to Viking rule. The Vikings captured him and demanded that he renounce Christianity and become their puppet ruler. Edmund refused. So the Vikings executed him. He was tied to a tree and shot with arrows until he died, and later he became known as Saint Edmund. With East Anglia conquered, Viking control across England continued to grow. Settlements began forming, and Viking leaders started ruling over large regions. This eventually led to the creation of something called the Danelaw. The Danelaw was the part of England controlled by the Vikings. In these areas, Scandinavian customs and laws were followed instead of Anglo-Saxon traditions. Cities like York became major Viking centers, where Norse culture mixed with local English traditions. Viking traders, farmers, and warriors began settling permanently. In other words, the invasion didn't just bring destruction. It permanently changed English culture, language, and society. But despite all these victories, one kingdom refused to fall. That kingdom was Wessex. And its ruler was Alfred the Great. Alfred faced the Viking threat multiple times, and there were moments when it looked like Wessex would collapse just like the other kingdoms. At one point, Alfred was forced to hide in the marshes while Viking forces occupied much of his territory. But Alfred adapted. He reorganized his military, built fortified towns called burhs, and created a new defense system that allowed his forces to respond quickly to Viking attacks. Eventually, Alfred confronted the Viking leader Guthrum at the Battle of Edington in 878. This time, the Vikings were defeated. The victory forced Guthrum to accept a peace treaty and convert to Christianity. The agreement divided England between Viking-controlled territory and Anglo-Saxon territory. It was a turning point in English history. When you think about it, the entire chain of events started with one moment, the execution of Ragnar Lothbrok. His death triggered a Viking invasion that destroyed kingdoms, created the Danelaw, and forced English rulers to completely change how they defended their land. Ironically, the Viking invasion also helped shape the future of England. The threat pushed leaders like Alfred the Great to unite their people and build stronger systems of defense and government. In a strange way, Ragnar's revenge helped create the foundation for the future English kingdom. History sometimes works like a ripple effect. One event leads to another, and before anyone realizes it, the entire course of history has changed. The Great Heathen Army began as a revenge mission for a fallen father, but it ended up rewriting the story of England forever. If you enjoyed this deep dive into Viking history, make sure to like the video and subscribe. And if you want to see the incredible story of Alfred the Great, the king who finally stopped the Vikings, check out the next video on your screen.